So YouTube is absolutely full of videos about making cutting boards, chopping boards. Let's call them cutting boards for the sake of the video. And there's a darn good reason why. In 2024, the global cutting board market was worth somewhere between 2.5 and 10 billion pounds. Billion, not million, billion. Good golly, gosh, heavens to Murgatroyd even, and other sayings. 50% of that was spent on wooden cutting boards. Awesome. Now my little website, I'll put a link to that below, where I sell all of my boards, doesn't make anywhere near that amount of money, but it did a pretty good job as far as I'm concerned in 2025. So what I'm going to do in this video and the few videos afterwards, a little mini series if you like, is share with you not only how I make them, but how I make some of the more popular patterned cutting boards. And in order to do that, we need to start with the basics. So in this video, this is going to be a really quick how-to basic end grain cutting board. Fasten your seat belts. Here we go. So first step, flatten and square your timber. Now I know you're probably thinking, hang on a minute, I don't know how much timber to cut. I'll get to that in a minute. Let me flatten it first, and then I'll explain sizing. Okay, now I've got my timber planed, we can talk about sizing. And the reason I need it planed is I need to see what size the timber is after planing. This timber started out life with me anyway, sold to me rather, as 38mm thick, or approximately 1.5 inches. I've written down my fractions so that I can also help those that work in imperial feet and inches. So this came to me just under 1.5 inches, 38mm, and by the time I finished planing it, it's now 34mm, which is, bear with, just under 1 3/8 inches. I can't go any more detail than that because the tape measure doesn't tell me. I was never that good at fractions. So 34mm, just under 1 3/8 inches. The reason that's so important is when we turn this into an end grain board, we're going to cut pieces off at the end and then turn them up. So imagine that was the full length of the board. We cut a piece off and then we turn it up. So the thickness of the timber becomes the thickness or the width of each row, and a number of these rows glued together will make the board. So the thickness of the timber after planing determines how many pieces we need in our board to achieve the size, the length of board that we want. So I've got some standard sizes that I target, and I say target because I don't cut boards down. I don't create waste just to achieve a specific size. I let the boards pretty much determine what size they're going to be, as long as it's around or near my target size. So my target size for this board is 400mm long, 300mm wide, or 15.5 inches long by 12 inches wide. Approximately. So in order to achieve that, I'm going to need X number of pieces of this turned on its end and stacked together. With this being 34mm, 10 pieces would give me 340mm long. So I'm going to need 12 pieces to hit that 400mm long, 15.5 inch long board. So 12 pieces. Okay, now I need to decide what thickness I want my board to be. Again, my target size is 40mm thick. I didn't write that one down. Check my tape measure. 40mm, just under 1.5 thick. So I'm going to cut 40mm off, and then I'm going to turn it up, cut 40mm, turn it up, all the way through the length of the board, then stack them all together. But I've got to allow for the thickness of my blade, the amount of timber my blade removes, which is about 3mm. No idea what that is in fractions, sorry guys. So each time I cut 40mm off, I lose 3mm. So when I'm working out how much timber I need, I'm going to allow 43mm. Plus I need to allow a little bit for sanding and leveling and flattening. So I'm going to cut off a 45mm piece of this board and then turn it up to make my end grain chopping board. And I need 12 pieces, so 45 times 12, 540, I think, if my maths serves. 540mm, 21.5 inches, but that's bare minimum. So I always cut, to make a 400mm 15.5 inch board, I cut 650mm 25.5 inches. So I've got a couple of pieces spare just in case I come across one that's got a split or a crack or a check in it or a knot in it that would ruin the look and the feel of the board. So to recap, to make a end grain cutting board, 400mm long, 15.5 inches by 300mm wide, 12 inches. I'm starting with timber that's 650mm long, 25.5 inches. For the width is really easy. I want 300mm. I'm starting off with this 310. So this will come out a tiny wee bit below that, maybe 295mm. But I'm quite happy with that. As I said, that's my target size. That's all the math out of the way. Hopefully that all made sense. If not, you can pause and rewind, or if you're a patron, all of these sizes, designs are all going to be available in PDFs for you for free. Did he say for free? He did, for free. So hop on over and check out the page. So now I'm going to cut these pieces down so that I can offset the joints. So my big piece here, 8.25 inches, just under 210mm, and my small piece, 100mm, just under 4 inches. So what I'm thinking is, if I went 3 pieces out of there, 2 smaller pieces out of there, that'll allow me to offset. I'll show you what I mean in a tick. 70mm would be pushing it a bit fine. If I went 65, 130, 195, I get a bit of loss there, and I can't really afford that. So if I go 67, 134, 194, 201, I'm going to go 68mm on this one, and this piece is going to give me 100mm, not quite. So 2 at 48 would do that one. So we'll slice them down and then glue them together. So I'm going to use 3 clamps for this. And what I want to know is the rough size So I've got a small piece, large piece, small piece, large piece, large piece, because when I've cut them and I turn them up, each alternate piece I'm gonna flip. So that will force the joints to be in different places and they'll be staggered and it'll just look a little better. The other thing I'm going to do is oppose the grain, not for strength, just because it looks better when you've got opposing joints or staggered joints. It gives the board a better look, I think. So I've got an up curve, a down curve, an up curve, kind of a down curve and an up curve. So now I've got the orientation of each piece sorted and the placement sorted. Now I'm going to put a little mark on it because I'm going to run each one through the planer just to get that perfect glue joint. As we're dealing with maple, maple shows lines like it's gone out of fashion and we don't want horrible black lines. They look as sweet as, look on the bottom. Yeah, well happy with that. Now take them all out there. I'm going to put some tape on my clamps. Otherwise they get totally fill up with glue. For some of them it's a bit late, but I can stop them getting any worse. Just for a bit of protection. And they can go back in there. Lovely. And now for some glue. So what I always do is set that one aside, don't want glue on that, and turn these up. Now, how much glue do you use? Well, a goodly amount, but not too much. You want to make sure every part of the wood is covered, and you don't want to be spreading it around as if you're spreading jam. You want a good... There you go, that's how much glue you want. This little roller is the perfect size. This came from Woodworker's Workshop, I believe. I'll see if I can find a link for you and put it below. It's absolutely perfect. There. Not too much, but a goodly amount. So all of the wood's covered, and then turn them back up, checking to make sure you've not turned anything the wrong way and your triangle is still in place. Drop that one down. Little pressure. Little pressure. That one will come in a bit. Little pressure. Cool. Now some let the glue dry a little bit before they wipe it off. I always forget, so I wipe it off now. Top and bottom. And we'll set that aside to dry overnight. So I'll see you in the morning. So with the glue now dry, I'm going to pop out the clamps, scrape off the glue snorts, and then I'm going to simply plane one side flat on the surface planer and then parallel and flatten the other side in the thicknesser. So now to cut it into the strips that I mentioned earlier. First step, cut a nice clean square edge on one end. Then I'm going to measure back from that clean square edge the 45mm that I mentioned, and I'm going to set that so that the outside of the blade is just on the line. I could just measure the 42mm and set the inside of the blade as you normally would on any ordinary cut, but I've kind of got into the habit of doing this way. So 45mm line, set that to the outside of the blade, and then set a stop block up on the fence so that when I cut each strip off, it won't be left trapped in between the blade and the fence, and there's plenty of room for me to push them out the way and be that little bit more efficient. So now that I've got all my strips, before I reach for the glue, I just want to knock off any little nibs that are left from the saw cut. That's all the pieces out of my blank. It feels a little large. That's 450. Actually, I think that would be alright. Looks a nice size. So let's go for 450. And now I'm going to flip every other piece. And hopefully the camera's picking this up, but you can see joint, 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 joint. All the joints are offset, which gives it more of a brick or crazy style. I would say the most popular style that customers look for. So small, large, small, large, small, large, small, large, small, large, small, large, small, large. Okay, so out of the two glue ups, this one's by far the most important because we need to get it as flat as possible, as tight together as possible, and square. So we need coals. So I've got these boards sat on two pieces of aluminium just to raise them up off of the bench so that I can get my coal underneath and a clamp. So I'll set that one to one side, flip them all, and then a healthy squeeze of glue. Not too much, just enough. That was too much. This could be a bit of a messy glue up. That is going to squeeze out everywhere. So if you want to know what too much looks like, there it is. So now I'm going to turn them all back up again. And I'm going to square them up using this old roofing stair square that I've got. I'm keeping it tight to this right hand side. Little bit pressure. And just making sure they're all nice and tight up against the square. So now I don't want to move them apart anywhere, or at all rather, until I get these cores on. So one on the top, one on the bottom. And then whichever clamps you've got that will do the jobby. Nice and carefully, so we don't alter the alignment. Knit them up. Then the same on the other side. And then we're going to clamp across them all, squeeze them all up nice and tight, again with cawls on the end, one in the middle first, again with tape on, and again with cawls at each end, so they get nice even spread of pressure. Give them a good nip up. And I'm going to remove this excess glue, and again set it aside to dry overnight. So my board's out, clamps, glue's dried, and now I'm going to flatten it once more, but this time we're dealing with end grains, so a little bit more care. I'm going to run it across the top of the planer or the jointer, but before I do that I'm going to put a little 3mm roundover on this back edge, because I'm going to flatten this side so that when it passes over the blades it'll reduce the chance of tear out on that back edge. Now I'm going to take super light passes, really shallow passes, so that again I reduce the chance of tear out on that back edge. Might need 3 or 4, 5 or 6 passes depending on how well I've done with the glue up. To flatten the other side of the board, I'm going to use the drum sander. If you don't have a drum sander, don't worry about it. You can use a thickness planer, you can use a hand plane, you could use a belt sander, or you could use an orbital sander. In fact, you should use whichever tool you've got and you're most comfortable working with. For the edges, again, I'm lucky enough to have this belt sander linisher, so I'm going to use that, but as I just mentioned, whichever tool you've got to hand. Hand plane, I've seen an awful lot of people use a crosscutter sled on their table saw, and that works perfectly fine. Once we've got both faces flat and the edges flat, it's time for sanding, I'm afraid. I always start with 80 grit, then 120 grit, then 180 grit, and then I can move to doing handles. Now, speed of sanding is really important. I don't think that's stressed enough by people online. You should proceed at a speed that allows you to complete, or allows the sander to completely remove the pencil mark. As you can see here, this is real-time sanding. I've not sped it up or slowed it down at all. Let the sander do the work. So once you've got rid of all of the marks left by your flattening process, planer, belt sander, etc, etc, then it's time to move to 120 grit all around both faces and all around the edges. Exactly the same speed as you did with the 80 grit, so that in a single pass you remove the pencil marks. So we're done with sanding for the minute, and now it's time for handles. There are a multitude of options for handles, and you should go with whichever you're most comfortable to use, whichever you like the look of, whichever you've got the best tools for. This is one of my preferred approaches, and it's really dead simple, just requires the use of a router. And what I've done is made myself the most basic and rudimentary of templates. So I've got a piece of 12mm ply with a couple of pieces screwed and glued into the front, so I can hook that on the end of the board. And I've got a little curve. And the router bit that I use with this is a bowl and tray bit, a white side bowl and tray bit. And I've got center marked on this template. So I simply mark the center on the board after I've decided which side's going to be the top and which side's going to be the bottom. And then place the template on the board, clamp it all down. And then I'd take 3 passes to get to a depth of about 15mm. Just enough so you can get your little pinkies in underneath and make it nice and easy to pick up the board. Dead simple approach, but like I said, you should go with whichever approach you've got the tools for and you feel comfortable to do. So next job is a round over on these corners here. A 3mm bit, but I'll look up the link for the bit and put it in the description below. You don't want to go too heavy here. The bigger the round over you put, the more old-fashioned the board is going to look. So a smaller round over gives that more modern feel. So I'm going to do all 4 corners a sec. And then I'm going to smooth them just to take out any burn marks that might be there. Make sure it's lovely and, well, smooth with this Velcro back. But I'm using the hard pad side rather. If I use the soft side, then I'm going to curve out these end bits. And I don't want that. I want it to remain nice and clean. So making sure to keep the pad nice and flat. Now, that's all it takes. So final job is just to break this edge. At the moment this is dead sharp and we don't want that. We want that nice and smooth, but again not too big a round over. So I've got a 1.2mm round over bit, literally an edge breaker that I'm just going to run all the way around the edges here and on this handle bit there, and then I'll smooth it off very lightly with a bit of 180, and then we'll give it a damping. So a little light rub over with 180, being really careful on the corners because we don't want to misshape them by being heavy-handed with the sandpaper. Then on to the bottom. So for this handle bit, the router bit didn't go right into that edge, so I need to just soften that again nice and lightly with the sandpaper, just to make sure there's no sharp bits for whoever's going to be picking up the board. And not forgetting to take out our little pencil line there. When I say damp it, I mean soak the damn thing. Get it wet. Don't be afraid. This is just ordinary tap water in one of those £2 garden spray bottles. Make sure you get every surface wet, because we want to swell the grain so it doesn't happen the first time it gets a washing. And now we wait till it's dry. So it took about an hour to dry, and now I'm going to go over it with 240 grit absolutely everywhere. And you've probably noticed through the video I've been using this suede leather mat just to make sure I don't get any damage on the surface as I'm finishing it off. So I've got 240 grit on my sander. I'm going to do the bottom first and then finish polishing off the top. So I'm using the flat hard side of this pad for these sides, because I don't want to deform any of that shaping, which will happen if I use the soft side. And all we're really doing at this stage is denibbing it after the damping, and you'll be able to feel smooth as a baby's butt. And finally, for the finish, I'm using pure food grade mineral oil, nothing else in it whatsoever. And I've got a rag, as you can see, completely soaked in the oil, and I'm going to give it a very generous coat. I used to put them in an oil bath, which I don't do anymore, because I find with the oil bath the wood soaks up loads and loads of oil, and then you got to wait sometimes for days for it all to drip out again, so I really can't see the point. So instead, what I try to do is give it a real good coat so that the board can absorb a lot. Give it good seasoning, and then I'm not waiting for days for it to stop dripping. You can see how much that's taken in, and that is absolutely plenty. There you can see all the grain pop. Absolutely beautiful. And the last job to do with this little beaut before we can add it to the website is to give it a wax. Now, I say a wax, this is a mixture of exactly the same pure mineral oil and pure beeswax, and I make it up myself in a little saucepan I nicked from inside, and then I had to buy a brand new one to replace it. So about a third of the mixture is beeswax, 2/3 mineral oil, and very carefully on the stove, heat the oil, stirring continuously until the beeswax dissolves. You can actually turn it off just before the beeswax is completely dissolved. You don't want to overheat it or it'll catch fire. And then you could decant it into pots straight away, and you've got the perfect finish, because the beeswax gets into the pores of the wood and seals it and stops it gaining or losing moisture, and also stops it taking on any food debris and getting smells or stains. And once you've waxed it and it's dried, just a dry bit of kitchen roll, give it a wipe over, make sure there's no excess on it, and it'll have that lovely sheen and look beautiful, just like this one. An absolute work of art, if I say so myself. And that's all there is to it to make a beautiful end grain chopping board. Few steps to go through to get there, absolutely. But each one of those steps is really, really basic. Break it down and look at each individual task that you need to do. And you'll see none of them are that complicated or advanced. Just take your time, go through it nice and slowly. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider giving us a like and possibly a subscribe, and join me in my next video, because I'm going to start showing you how to make all of these beautiful pattern boards and a few others besides. So hope to see you then. Ta-ra.